Beginning page 26 of the full pretrial. Attorney Kratz called Thomas Fassbender to the stand. The clerk, please raise your right hand. Thomas Fassbender, called as witness, having been first duly sworn, was examined and testified as follows. The clerk, please be seated. State your name for the record, please. The witness, Thomas Fassbender, Fassbender. Direct examination. Mr. Kratz, how old are you employed? I'm a special agent with the Wisconsin Department of Justice, Division of Criminal Investigation. Sometime in early November of this year, were you asked to participate in the search for a missing person and thereafter participated in the criminal investigation regarding Teresa Halbach? Yes. How were you asked to participate in that? The Calumet County Sheriff's Department requested DCI services. Agent Fassbender, is it fair to indicate that you, together with Calumet County investigator Mark Riegert, served as lead investigators in this investigation? Yes. Agent Fassbender, let me first have you direct your attention to what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit Number 2, the aerial photograph to your immediate right. Since other witnesses are going to be using that exhibit, could you tell us what that is, please? That's an aerial photograph of the Avery Salvage Yard. How is it that you recognize that? Because I was at that scene for about 7 days. About how many hours a day were you there? Probably averaged about 16. All right, so it's fair that you're pretty familiar with almost every inch of that property, isn't that true? Well, I'm familiar with it. I wouldn't say every inch. All right, Agent, I'm going to hand you a laser pointer. It's the yellow button that is in the middle of this particular device. Why don't you just kind of give us the lay of the land? How is it that you come in from the highway onto every property and perhaps point out those areas that are marked on Exhibit 2? Okay, every road would be coming into the right here from, I believe, the north. It kept going down upward here, and the highway is up here to the north. If you would go to what would be, I believe, the west along this driveway or road that here, and down to the end where you see a little circle here. Down here you have the residence that Stephen Avery stayed in. His sister Barb Avery lived next door to him. Stephen's garage would be right here, and Barbara's garage right there. And then down here, I believe this is Mr. and Mrs. Avery's house, right back here. If you take this road, if I could just stop you by Mr. and Mrs. Avery, do you mean Stephen's parents? Is that right? Yes, Stephen's parents, Al, and I think it's Dolores. Go ahead. Who else lived there? And this road down here to the south would take you down to what I would believe they call the pit or the salvage yard area. You go by, I think this is what it would be Chuck Avery's residence, which is Stephen Avery's brother, right along here. And then there are shops, and the office, I believe, is right here, main office, and the shops where they would do their work, their salvage work. And down here, there was a crusher located down in the pit. I think it was down in this area, right in here, to crush cars. And there's a small road that goes along the south end. There's a big berm back here. On the other side of that berm is what I would be the gravel pit or whatever. And let me stop you. At the bottom portion of Exhibit Number 2, that would be where Avery property ends. Is that correct? That's correct. Now, when you were asked to assist in the investigation, in fact, very early in the investigation, Saturday, the 5th of November, had you received and did you assist in the execution of a search warrant of the entire Avery property, all vehicles on the Avery property, all residences, and outbuildings? Yes. Agent Fassbender, I understand that on the 5th of November, law enforcement took control, if you will, of the Avery property. Do you know when it was that law enforcement relinquished control? That is, the dozens of search warrants that were eventually executed were concluded. Do you recall? It was on Saturday and the 12th, I believe. Okay, about a week. Is that right? Yes. Now, throughout that week, Agent Fassbender, were you aware of the various items that you believed had evidentiary value being found? And as lead investigator, were you kept apprised of not only when these items were found, but specifically where they were found upon this property? Yes, most of the time. You mentioned that there was a residence of Stephen Avery. Do you know the address of that residence? 12932 Avery Road, town of Gibson, Manitowoc County, state of Wisconsin. Later, that is, several days into the investigation, you had occasion to make personal contact with Stephen Avery. Is that correct? Yes. Is that gentleman in the courtroom this afternoon? Yes. Could you point him out for the record to your right, wearing the black and white striped outfit? Attorney Kratz, Your Honor, I would ask that the record reflect the defendant's identification. The court. The record will reflect that the witness identified Mr. Avery. Attorney Kratz. Now, Agent Fassbender, very shortly after Ms. Sturm was found was believed to be Teresa Halbach's vehicle, did you become involved that day? Did you proceed to the Avery Salvage Yard to assist this investigation? Yes. During the course of your investigation, did you have occasion to review official reports of the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, and were you able to determine ownership of the RAV4 that was located on that Stephen Avery property? Yes. I've handed you what's been marked as identification as plaintiff's exhibit number 4. Can you tell us what that is, please? That's a certificate of record copy from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation pertaining to a 1990 Toyota truck registration registered by Wisconsin license plate number SWH582 to Teresa M. Halbach and a vehicle identification number JT3HP10V 5X 7113044. And on the 5th of November, and in fact, days thereafter, were you able to determine if the RAV4 found on Stephen Avery's property, in fact, was the same RAV4 that was owned by Teresa Halbach? Yes. And does Exhibit 4, that is the certified copy of transportation of record, verify that fact? Yes. Attorney Kratz would move the admission of Exhibit 4 at this time, Your Honor. The court. Any objection? Attorney Loy, no objection for purposes of this hearing, Your Honor. The court. All right. Exhibit 4 is admitted. Counsel, I'm going to ask you to approach here briefly. Sidebar taken. Attorney Kratz, I'm sorry, Judge, did you rule on its admissibility? The court. The defense admitted that, or the defense did not object to the admission of the exhibit, and I did admit it. And I will indicate for the benefit of everyone else, I was handed a note indicating that as part of the broadcast of the proceedings, we've been told at times the microphones are apparently sensitive enough that people on the broadcast can hear the attorneys or what the attorneys are saying to each other. So make sure you press the mute button when you talk to each other or lean back far enough away from the microphone so that won't happen. Attorney Kratz, try not to give away any secrets. That's fine, Judge. Attorney Kratz, Mr. Fassbender, on the 5th of November, were you also involved in processing or review of the RAV4 that was found upon the Avery property? Yes. Would you be able to view where upon that property the RAV was located? Yes. And using the laser pointer again, referring to exhibit number 2, could you again give us an orientation where the different buildings, residences may be, and where Teresa Halbach's RAV4 was found? Again, Stephen Avery's residence up on the northwest corner of the property by his sister Barb. His parents, brother Chuck, and the buildings where their shops and offices and the road going south into the pit, the extreme south or of the edge of the property, and down towards the southwest portion of the property on a small trail, I guess you would call it. Her vehicle was located alongside that trail. After the search warrant was authorized, did you participate in viewing the vehicle, and did you assist members of the Wisconsin State Crime Lab in processing and deciding on how to search that vehicle? Yes, to a certain degree. What was decided regarding the processing of that search of the RAV4? What was decided regarding the processing or search of the RAV4? That the vehicle would essentially transported as it was found and not processed at the scene, transported through Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory in an enclosed trailer and processed at the crime lab in Madison. I'm going to show you on the picture behind you what's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 5. Can you tell us what that is, please? That's a picture of a portion of the RAV vehicle that was located or found on the Avery property, I believe. This is a picture that's apparently taken in the evening or early evening hours. Is that the same or similar as it appeared to you just prior to the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory processing and, in fact, loading up that vehicle to take it to Madison? Yes. Attorney Kratz, I move the admission of Exhibit 5, Judge. The court. Any objection? Attorney Loy, none for the purposes of this hearing. The court. Exhibit 5 is admitted. Attorney Kratz, Agent Fassbender, could you remind those in this room who weren't at the scene what weather became like just after perhaps taking this picture? It became very nasty. It rained extremely hard. Shortly after that picture, obviously it was dark, it was night, visibility was pretty much zero, except for the spotlights that had been put up by the Sheriff's Department. Excuse me, the impending weather, did that play into yours and Crime Lab's decision to remove the vehicle to have it searched in a more pristine area, that being at the Madison Crime Lab? Certainly, that played into our decision. Now, when that vehicle was located, it did not bear Teresa Halbach's registration plates or vehicle plates. Is that correct? That's correct. During the course of the investigation and the next several days after the 5th of November, did you seek the assistance and receive the assistance of literally hundreds of law enforcement and other professionals to search virtually all of the Avery property? Yes. During one of those search efforts, are you familiar that in detail search of interior of all those vehicles on the Avery property, that the license plates for Teresa's RAV4 were located? Yes. Could you describe for the court where they were located, please? Alongside the entry road going down to Stephen Avery's residence and Barbara Avery's residence. On the south side of that road, there was a salvaged vehicle or a vehicle located right there. That law enforcement personnel that were doing the search located the 2 license plates inside the vehicle, and they were crinkled up or rolled up in that type of condition. All right, and so that the court is aware, is it your understanding that literally every vehicle on that salvage yard was searched, not once, but at least 2 times during the course of that week, not only for the body of Teresa Halbach, but also for, Teresa Halbach, but also at any times that might have been an evidentiary value. Is that fair? Yes. Agent Fassbender, I'm going to ask you to direct your attention to the upper left-hand corner of Exhibit number 2. There are items which are identified as burn barrels. Could you describe what those are, please? This burn barrel, just to the north of Stephen Avery's garage and residence, had been identified by Mr. Avery as his burn barrel. And then there were some burn barrels that were located more to the east and south or southeast of Barbara Avery's house. And then also a burn pit or burn area directly behind Stephen Avery's garage or to the south of his garage. The last item, or one of the last items identified on number 2, is this something called a Plymouth Voyager? Can you tell us where that is and what the significance of that has? The Plymouth Voyager is located right here, somewhat in between Stephen Avery's residence and Barbara Avery's residence. That was a vehicle that Stephen Avery had called the auto trader and asked to have someone come out and take a picture of to put in their magazine for sale. We'll talk about Mr. Avery's statements later, but did Mr. Avery himself admit that Teresa Halbach took pictures of that Plymouth Voyager on the afternoon of the 31st of October of 2005? Took a picture of it, yes. Attorney Loy, I'm going to object on the grounds of foundation, Your Honor. We haven't heard any testimony that this admission by Mr. Avery has been made to this gentleman or to someone else? The court, sustained. Attorney Loy, and moved to strike. The court, the answer is stricken from the record at this point. By Attorney Kratz. Did Mr. Avery make those admissions in your presence? Yes. Okay, Agent Fassbender, well, let's just jump a little forward. On the 8th of November 2005, did you have the occasion to make contact with Stephen Avery and, in fact, execute an arrest warrant for Stephen Avery for a charge of being a felon in possession of a firearm? I believe it was the 9th, but I did do that activity. But I thought it was on the 9th of November. Was it Wednesday, the 9th? The Agent Fassbender, I'm going to hand you or show you what's been marked as identification as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 6. Can you tell us what that is, please? That is a Miranda warning form used by law enforcement to read people their Miranda warning before questioning them. And the date on this shows that it was November 8th, 2005 at 12:50 p.m. that these rights were read to Stephen Avery. When you read Mr. Avery those rights after taking him into custody, did he tell you that he understood his Miranda warnings? Investigator Wiggett actually read the rights to Stephen Avery, and yes, he said he understood his rights. Just so everybody's clear, were you and Investigator Wiggett together in the room, and did you observe and participate in the interview of Mr. Avery? Yes, the rights were read to him in my vehicle, in my presence. Is that form signed? Yes. Who signed it? Who's it signed by? Stephen Avery. Is it witnessed by anybody? Myself and Investigator Wiggert. And upon signing Exhibit number 6, did Mr. Avery agree to answer questions for you? Yes. Attorney Kratz, Judge, I would move admission of Exhibit 6 at this time. The court, any objection to Exhibit 6? Attorney Loy, not for this hearing, Your Honor. The court, Exhibit 6 is admitted. By Attorney Kratz. Agent Fassbender, during the contact you had with Stephen Avery on that day you took him into custody, did you also make any observations of Mr. Avery of a physical nature, whether Mr. Avery had any signs of injury upon his body? Yes. Any injuries noted on Mr. Avery that you believed were significant? Yes. Can you describe those for the court, please? There was what appeared to be a scabbed over cut, fairly substantial cut, on his middle finger on his right hand. During the course of your contact also with Mr. Avery, did you obtain from him a sample of his saliva or something called a buccal swab that was later transported to the Wisconsin State Crime Lab for DNA analysis? Yes, I was present when a registered nurse at the Aurora Medical Center in Two Rivers obtained those samples. Now, you are not a DNA analyst, are you? No. Is that the kind of analysis that needs to be conducted by a forensic scientist, or at least somebody with expertise at a laboratory like the Wisconsin State Crime Lab? Yes. And Agent Fassbender, talking about your conversation with Mr. Avery, was Mr. Avery specifically asked questions regarding his contact with Teresa Halbach on the 31st of October? Yes. What did Mr. Avery tell you? Mr. Avery told us that sometime between 8 and 8:30 in the morning, he had made a call to the auto trader to see if he could have a picture taken of that Plymouth Voyager in question to put in the auto trader. Eventually, he indicated that he made some other calls to auto trader and to Teresa Halbach, attempting to determine whether she was going to come out to take those pictures of the vehicle, and that on at about 2 or 2:30 in the afternoon that day, she in fact did come out and took a picture of that vehicle. That when she did that, he came out of the house, saw that she had taken the picture and was recording the serial number on that vehicle, and that he went into that location outside of that van and paid her $40 in cash for that. Then he said she walked over to her vehicle. He accompanied her, and she got into her vehicle, gave him a copy of an Auto Trader magazine, which he took, and he returned to his house. Based upon Mr. Avery's admission of taking talking to Ms. Halbach on the afternoon of the 31st, and based upon your posture as lead investigator in this case, have you determined whether anybody saw Ms. Halbach alive after that conversation? No. Attorney Loy, I'm going to object, Your Honor, on grounds of foundation. I think it also calls for an opinion on his part. The court, well, he can speak to his own knowledge on the issue. I think how much value it has is dependent on greater foundation, but I will allow him to answer the question. By Attorney Kratz. Do you understand the question? Yes. To my knowledge, I had no knowledge that she was seen alive after that point in time. Was Mr. Avery specifically asked about burning items upon his property, and specifically if he had burned anything on the 31st of October or any time thereafter? Yes, he was asked. What did he tell you? He was asked about the burn barrel, which he identified as his burn barrel, right there to the north of his residence and garage area. He said that he had not burned in that barrel in over a week, or prior to that week before, or prior to the day Teresa came to his house to take that picture. The burn area or burn pit behind his garage, which he identified as being right where his dog was, which is where the dog was, right behind the garage, he again said he had not burned there either in at least more than a week, and actually it was the burn pit area. I'm going to correct myself. The burn pit area that he said that he had not burned in until prior, his last burn was prior to that day that Teresa had come to on the 31st. The burn barrel was quite some time or quite a while, he said, and he designated at least more than a week or prior to the week before. And again, he said that he had not burned in that burn barrel on the night of the 31st or the day of 31st of October 31st. Agent, I'm going to ask you to look at the diagram to the left of Exhibit 2, and that's been marked as Plaintiff's Exhibit number 3. Do you recognize that diagram? Yes. Can you tell the court what that is, please? Yes. Can you tell the court what that is, please? That's a diagram put together by the Wisconsin State Patrol. I think it's based off of what they call a total station, and basically usually is done to, I can't think of the word, scale? Scale, done to scale. Okay. Of some of the Avery property, including Stephen Avery's house and residence area. Question, and specifically that area behind depicted in Exhibit number 3, is that larger depiction of what would be the northernmost part of Exhibit number 2, and do you believe it will help explain some of the evidence that is to be described and some of the explanations of the relationship of the evidence to the various property throughout this and other hearings? Yes. I may have asked you, Agent, Exhibit number 2 and Exhibit number 3, do those appear to be accurate reflections and representations of the Avery property, and specifically as they were laid out on between November 5th of November and 11th of November 2005? Definitely. Finally, Agent Fassbender, when or were there attempts to be made to identify what were believed to be human remains found upon the Avery property, and compared to those standards or exemplars of the victim, in this case, Teresa Halbach? Yes. During the course of that process, did you participate in obtaining an exemplar of what's called an intimate sample of Teresa Halbach to transport to the crime lab for analysis? Yes. Attorney Loy, I'm going to object, Your Honor. There's been no foundation for these questions. There's been no testimony to that any samples were found at this point. Sustained. Attorney Kratz, do you want me to recall this witness, Judge, after 7 or 8 witnesses testify? My point, Judge, is that I appreciate the objection, but as to the transport of the exemplars, that's the only part of the DNA of this case that the witness will testify. If the court would be so kind to at least hear the testimony and reserve ruling on the objection when that evidence is presented at this time. The court, well, as I understand it, Mr. Loy's objection, if the witness is going to answer yes to this, he could at least explain where they came from. I don't know that if I understand your objection correctly, Mr. Loy. Attorney Kratz, he said there was no testimony about any remains being found yet. There will be other witnesses that will testify to that, Judge. It's the analysis and matching of those remains later that I'm just asking this witness if he obtained what's called an intimate sample for the victim. The court, okay, but there hasn't been any foundation about where they came from, even from where he understood they came from. Attorney Kratz, all right, I can certainly do that, Judge, and then we'll have other witnesses testify about that. By Attorney Kratz, Agent Fassbender, when did you become aware, as lead investigator, that human remains were found upon the Avery property during the execution of the search warrant between the 5th and 11th of November of this year? Yes. Could you describe and point for the court the area you were not only there aware, but you were shown human remains were found in this property? And could you describe and point for the court an area where you not only were aware, but where you found and shown human remains were found on the property? That area would be the burn area, or identified as the burn area, right behind Stephen Avery's garage, or the south of his garage. That was the burn pit area right there. And what was nature, to the best of your observed? Attorney Loy, Your Honor, I would like to interpose an objection at this point. We still don't have foundation. I don't know if this witness is testifying about things that he found or that somebody else found. And I understand what Mr. Kratz is trying to do, but I think we may be trying to put the cart before the horse here in terms of having this testimony. The court, well, I'm going to let this witness testify at this time what he did with whatever he was told. I'll reserve ruling on your objection. I'm obviously not going to take his answers as evidence of actual transport of remains without their being tied with subsequent testimony. I think that addresses your objection, which at this point I will view as very well taken. Attorney Kratz, just as an offer of proof, Judge, there will be testimony from at least 3 witnesses as to the actual excavation and recovery of that scene. I intend to ask this witness, just as a result of that, did he obtain what was commonly called an exemplar from the victim thereafter? The court, I think you have to ask this witness, though, and establish a foundation of how he got whatever it was that he sent in for his role, and then you can. Attorney Kratz, I'm going to do that, Judge. The court, all right. Attorney Kratz, Agent Fassbender, again, with just what you were told and what you observed, what was the nature of the human remains found in what's referred to in Exhibit 2 as the burn area? It's also referred to as the same thing on Exhibit 3. What was found was the nature of what was found was charred bones, human bones, and some tissue. Did you understand that those remains were transported for analysis to the places building, including the Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory, or what's commonly referred to as a DNA analysis? Yes. And regarding that process, were you asked to identify, obtain, thereafter have transported to the Wisconsin Crime Laboratory, again for analysis, what's referred to as an intimate sample of Teresa Halbach? Yes. Were you able to identify and were you able to find such a sample? Yes. Could you tell the judge how you did that? Please. Initially, I looked into Teresa Halbach's health and medical history to see if we could find some such samples. And I was able to locate pap smear slides that she had provided or were taken from her at Bellin Health in Green Bay and are being maintained at the Bellin Health Lab in Green Bay. They identified 3 or 4 such samples that were taken during the past 5 years. They maintained those samples for 5 years. And your role in the identification of those such samples, I should say, recognizing the role that you were also asked to retrieve and have transported those intimate samples, specifically Sherry Colhane at the crime lab in Madison for analysis. Yes, I obtained them from Bellin Health Lab, and they were packaged and sealed. I put them in another envelope and sealed them, and that they were ultimately transported to Wisconsin State Crime Laboratory. All right, Agent Fassbender, the scene itself, that is, the Avery property, when the search warrants were done, being executed, and the analysis of all those areas were completed, Was that then turned back over to the Avery family? Yes. Attorney Kress, all right. For this hearing, Judge, that's all the questions I have of Agent Fassbender. Thank you.